that would be fun. Yeah? All at the same time.
Right, today what we're gonna do, we're gonna try to go back on times and see how we can put our body in connection with the capoeira, because it's not the same training capoeira but putting yourself in connection with the capoeira. So now we're gonna try with Capoeira Mocambos here today to go back to the capoeira itself. You know, the music, the game, the history and everything like that you guys try to keep in the tradition and the principles of the capoeira. So yeah, well done for the international events you're holding here. There's not many people who can do the same. It's been 10 years since I was here. You know? And I was seeing new people coming frequently.
I was a teenager when I was introduced to Brazilian music. I was soon referred to the art of capoeira, a martial art disguised as a dance invented by kidnapped Africans rebelling against slavery in Brazil. By 1997, I joined a bona fide capoeira school in Manchester after attending workshops that hosted visiting Brazilian masters. Fast forward to 2010, and there were two major events. One, I graduated to monitor, a second-level teacher, and two, I established my own school, Centro Cultural da Capoeira Mocambo. UNESCO defines capoeira as an Afro-Brazilian cultural practice, simultaneously a fight and a dance, that can be interpreted as a tradition, a sport, and even an art form. The capoeira circle is a place where knowledge and skills are learned by observation and imitation. It also functions as an affirmation of mutual respect between communities, groups, and individuals, and promotes social integration and the memory of resistance to historical oppression. New viewers of capoeira may identify elements of martial arts, acrobatics, dance and music. Capoeiristas, however, see these as components of a much greater intangible heritage that adds up to a holistic cultural phenomenon.
The music, the game, the history, tradition and the principles.
Brazilian martial art.
Capoeira community.
The martial art.
The creativity, the singing, the musicality of it, self-defense.
My understanding has completely changed actually, because to be fair I didn't really know what it was, but all I saw was some people jumping around each other, which it still is, and having fun, that's still part of it. But what I didn't understand was that there's a huge wider cultural aspect and musical aspect to capoeira, and so that has really come to the fore about the history, where capoeira comes from, how important the music is, and just the capoeira community.
Me, I'm coming from martial arts where I think purely movement. Capoeira is also due to that culture side, the music side, the language side, and this idea of playing a game rather than having a fight.
I describe it as two people sort of kicking each other but then ducking and moving away, so sort of on a dancey style of martial arts against each other. If you just enjoy what you're doing and you're just going with the flow, then you don't really need points or who's winning.
I think the opportunity to just cartwheel to my heart's content, and honestly, I don't really need that much of an excuse to be told it's okay to do handstand cartwheel on the high street. It's genius, love it.
Yeah, I didn't do it much as a kid, so as an adult I'm making up for it now.
The people there, the youngsters and the adults that are involved, they just seem to really enjoy it all.
It's a non-contact martial art, which is great because I've got daughters, and sometimes martial art, children are concerned about the impact, and it's physical and then they get hurt. And it's just the creativity, the singing, the musicality of it, as well as the martial art element, self-defense, which is really why I wanted my children to do it, and why we joined Capoeira Mocambo in North Wales.
Fy hoff profiad yn wneud capoeira hyd yn hyn oedd chwarae yn y seremoni agoriadol ar gyfer gêm terfynol FA Cup Cymraeg. Roedd o'n hynod o gyffrous a hefyd cawson ni tocynnau am ddim I weld y gêm ar ôl I ni chwarae.
You've been here for 10 years. Do you know how much it takes to carry a group for 10 years?
We do a regular Black History Month event in Bangor and part of Bangor Carnival as well. And
we've also done it on the clock tower, doing performances.
Bangor Clock Tower.
I've been involved with Black History Month in Bangor Clock Tower.
Workshops in Pontiac.
Were you going to tell us about a batizado?
People come from Brazil to demonstrate to the young people that's involved in Colin's class.
One of the most famous, our first batizado, was basically a grading event. That was the first time we got masters from Brazil and all over Europe to come to an event and just to show the public what capoeira is and see the high-level players playing and getting to play with them as well. That was probably the first time that made me say, yeah, capoeira is something special and it's something I'm going to be doing as long as I can.
I've been in batizadas, which is where teachers and then students go in a hodder and have games. Then depending on how well you did, depends on which belt you get.
Capoeira Mocambo.
Capoeira Mocambo.
Capoeira Mocambo.
Capoeira Mocambo.
Capoeira Mocambo.
Because it was important for me to be a Centro Cultural. I chose that as a name because it was this image that traditional practice of capoeira, like I learned from my master, offers the opportunities then for each individual to find their own way with it. You know, Mr. Sombra talks a lot about context of how that's different according to your character, your environment, your language, your work, anything, you know. So I've got respect for everyone who's involved in contemporary dance, the other martial arts, different kinds of music. But for me, a lot of the practice of traditional capoeira offers the opportunity for people to develop those skills.
Oh yeah, it does. It does. As I say, capoeira is more a creativity. When you have it already inside of you, you just need someone to bring it out, you know, and to make you be very creative, not just follow everything what everybody else does.
Yeah, to have the independence and the confidence for yourself.
Yeah, that's what we call freedom. I take by experience, when you force someone into something, it never works. Because when I join a class, I just go there because, well, I want to learn something. I don't want to be judged by the mistakes what I do, or I don't want to be told off when I do something what's not part of the class, you know. So this part of the capoeira, when it brings the freedom, is for us to discover who we are and where we are. It really pays off everything what you're trying to teach them. We're not even talking about capoeira, but about what the questions they were asking inside, the confidence they have to come and then just read something what is on the screen. When we talk about the lineage of capoeira, it indicates where you come from. But when you talk about ancestry, when you talk about lineage of capoeira, you have to have something on the background. For example, I'm not a disciple of Mestre Jaime. I'm a student of Mestre Jaime. To get to the point when I can say I follow all my master's steps, that would be very controversial. First, because let's say I'm quite a fat guy. My master is a very slim guy. He's very fast. The way he projects the game, the way he does the things, is something what I would never be able to do. He's not a guy who practices acrobatic, but he has such of a stamina and he trains a lot.
I enjoy training with different teachers because I get to know their different styles and techniques of capoeira, and it's really interesting how they see capoeira as, and if they do it on the floor or more kicks or more dancing, and I really enjoy getting to know their styles.
Capoeira comes from Brazil. Capoeira originally became a martial art because of slaves got took from Africa to Brazil.
They got forced to be slaves, so then they created this movement and they named it capoeira and they used it to slowly fight back.
And they had like hideouts in the trees.
Capoeira is a product of global history. The understanding of where, how and why capoeira developed is as important to the capoeirista as the ability to perform a physical movement. Monarchs, aristocrats and governments throughout Europe instituted the kidnap, trafficking and enslavement of Africans for over 500 years. Formerly free Africans were transported to the New World, the Americas and the Caribbean. Those who survived the horrific trafficking conditions were subjected to further cruelty to force them to toil the land which had been stolen from the indigenous people. Sugar cultivation was the most sustained and lucrative trade throughout the 15th century, with the Portuguese colonising Brazil and the British colonising Jamaica, amongst others. Capoeira is an example of surviving African traditions that were developed and applied as a martial art in order to rebel against slavery in Brazil. The principles of capoeira as a martial art are distinct to the circumstances of enslavement. Ambush and surprise were needed, the means of absorbing or deflecting blows, rather than outright physical resistance to corporal punishments, and, most importantly, using dance as a disguise for the true intent of the physical training.
Roeddwn nhw'n teuluoedd yn falch iawn o bod yn planwyr cyfrifol, ond mewn gwirionedd yn anffodus doedden nhw ddim yn planwyr cyfrifol o gwbl. Enghraifft, roedd y teulu I gyd yn byw yn bell iawn o'r planigfeydd yn Jamaica, felly doedden nhw ddim yn ymwybodol iawn o beth oedd yn mynd ymlaen yno, a doedden nhw ddim really yn gwybod sut oedd y Gaethweision yn cael ei trin.
Because Richard Penrhyn was also what we call an anti-abolitionist, and what that means is, in the 19th century, a bit more than 200 years ago, there were people who were campaigning to bring an end to slavery, but you also had people who were campaigning to keep slavery, and they were people, obviously, who made lots of money from it. And Richard Penrhyn, Lord Penrhyn, who lived here, was one of those people. He was an MP, he was a politician for Liverpool, and Liverpool was a very important city in what we call the triangular trade. It's about how goods were moved from ports in Britain, so Liverpool being one of them, where Richard Penrhyn was an MP, and then taken to West Africa, exchanged for people who were then taken forcibly across the Atlantic to places like Jamaica, forced to work there, and then on sugar plantations, for example, the Penrhyns owned sugar plantations, and then the sugar was then brought back to Britain, so that's why they called it the triangular trade, because it was like a triangle like that. So people like Richard Penrhyn, Lord Penrhyn here, and people like Robert Norris, the man who wrote this book, were actively trying to stop the abolition of the slave trade. And that's why that's so important here in this place. And there's actually a personal, he's written in the book by desire of the author. So I think we can take that what he means by that was that it was a personal gift to Richard Penrhyn. This object here, it looks like a beautiful thing. But again, if we delve into the story of this box, it's actually a teapoy. So a teapoy is something that held tea, as you might guess. But what's interesting for you perhaps is that it was made from a wood from Brazil, so from rosewood. And rosewood was harvested by enslaved people in Brazil. So the wood came from Brazil, and then inside this box you would have had tea from China, you'd have had sugar from Jamaica. So we're in this very, very posh, wealthy room in Bangor, and here we have this object that links us to the history of different people from different countries all over the world again.
Yn y castell yma, mae gen ni exhibition ymlaen, a mae yna bocs yn enw The Jamaica Box. A dydyn ni ddim yn really siŵr beth cafodd y bocs yma ei ddefnyddio ar gyfer, ond un o'r syniadau ydy roedd o'n bocs cyfathrebu rhwng Cymru a Jamaica.
We don't know what would have been in it, but the label says Jamaica documents. So we can assume that he would have kept things in there to do with his plantations in Jamaica.
Could it have been like the slave names?
That's certainly something it could have been. So that's a document that exists, that's in the archives in Bangor, which is a list of names of people who were brought to Jamaica to work on the plantations. And I think what's really sad about that is, the names are often, they're English names. They wouldn't have been their real names. And our name is so important to us, isn't it? It tells us who we are, where we've come from, and to take somebody's name away it's a big thing. And you can tell here how important family and name are to the Penrhyns, because these people are all, they're all their family. So it was very important to them where they come from, who their family was. But these people, their names were completely taken away from them, so they wouldn't have known, who their family were, where they come from. So it's very sad, really, looking at the list of names.
The Penrhyn family made their fortune using the labour of hundreds of kidnapped and enslaved Africans to tend their sugar plantations in Jamaica. Richard Penrhyn used some of the profits from sugar and slave labour to build a 300-room holiday home to impress favoured guests, Penrhyn Castle. The vast profits generated on Jamaican sugar plantations went on to bankroll Richard Penrhyn's subsequent business venture, the Penrhyn Slate Quarry. industrialising the north of Wales by building boatyards, roads, railways and further infrastructure to facilitate extraction and transport of slate. Tyranny and oppression never far behind, Richard Pennant's treatment of local Welsh quarrymen resulted in the Great Penrhyn Strike between 1900 and 1903, still the longest strike in Welsh history. Counter to this, many history books remember him as the Improver. The 28th of August 1833 marked the abolition of slavery in the British Empire, bar India. With the emancipation of the enslaved Africans came compensation. The 764 newly freed Africans considered property of the Pennants received none of the compensation. Instead, the beneficiaries of the largest payout in British history were those who had already amassed wealth through the systematic kidnap, torture and forced labour of the African people. George Hay Dawkins' Pennant received £14,683, equivalent to £1.3 million today.
The little boy that's got his hand on the dog, he's called George Hay Dawkins Pennant. So he was the Lord Penrhyn who built this castle. There was a house here for hundreds of years, but what they did was they built this castle on the same site. So it was that little boy there.
Each capoeira practitioner develops themselves, their knowledge and their cunning for use in play, dance and fight. The capoeira game is a physical dialogue which takes place between two people. The music made by the community creates the context for that dialogue. Capoeira Mocambo strives to facilitate education through robust and non-judgmental dialogue, so that all capoeira practitioners can be confident in representing themselves and others in any arena.